Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About It Tuesday. I'm Georgette, I'm the mom.
And I'm TJ, I'm the son.
And we both study and work in the field of psychology, and we are passionate about sharing what we know with you so that you can live your best life. So today we're going to talk about stress. And there are lots of different definitions of stress depending on where you go on the internet. Do you want to share your definition, TJ?
The way that I look at stress, I don't even like to call it stress. I like to call it more so pressure. And it's when there is, normally comes from one distinct thing, but could be from multiple things. But from there, just kind of gets more anxious thoughts, gets more of a kind of negative biological response from a body standpoint. And it's basically just your mind and your body kind of negatively reacting to an external stimuli, or maybe your perceived notion of something on some type of external stimuli.
Right. Yeah, I think that's as good a definition as any. There are three components to stress. One is the stressor. That's what TJ was talking about, as the event.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be something like a major life event, or it could even be daily hassles that we experience. And the interesting thing about the difference between the two is oftentimes the more negative effects come from the daily hassles. Because when you think about it, some of these major life events we share with other people, so we're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
We have that support built in. We have people who understand what we're going through, and people who can help us as we're going through it together.
And with those daily stressors, it's almost like every single day you have to surmount it, right? Because it's every single day as opposed to just one big thing. And oftentimes we don't do that very well, right? We have a hard time of accepting that maybe this is going to be a continuation, and instead of focusing more so on my stress of, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Maybe I can switch it to the stress of what are the small amount of things that I actually can control in this area, because that's going to help you with stress as well.
Right. Another component to stress are mediating factors. And these are things like our personality or coping strategies, because we all can have the same stressor placed on us, but we respond differently. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we respond differently because we have different mediating factors. We have different personalities. We have different coping strategies. And even from one day to the next, I might handle a daily hassle differently than others, depending on like the compounding effects of things or my ability to use those coping strategies at that particular moment.
It's so very rarely about the external factor. It's always how we're internally going through it. Albeit some things are more challenging to get through from a cognitive standpoint, but regardless, it's the same type of ordeal.
Right. And then the third component is the response to stress, or the reaction to stress. And that could be behavioral, mental, physical, or all.
Oftentimes all three.
Yeah, oftentimes. Yeah. All right. So our body has a particular or consistent pattern of responses, the physiological response that occurs with stress. And that's actually called the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS as an abbreviation. And there is an initial stage 1. It's called alarm immobilization. And this is marked by the awareness of the presence of the stressor. You want to talk about what happens?
Yeah. Well, the first thing we'll talk about, the sympathetic nervous system becomes energized. What the sympathetic nervous system does is, it in one way, it kind of acts sympathetic towards you. It thinks it needs to take on a lot more of the bodily functions than yourself, because it wants you to devote more cognitive efforts towards the event, or even less so cognitive, more so just kind of, more so instinctual, if anything else. But from the sympathetic nervous system response, our heart increases. When our heart increases, we do more emotional, which brings the blood flow here, which also kind of keeps the blood in our brain, but doesn't necessarily keep it flowing. And when that happens, we're getting less blood flow to the entirety of the muscles. We're getting less blood flow to the digestive system, which recent studies show have a lot of brain neurons around it. And also it limits your blood flow to your frontal lobe, which is going to make you more rational, more logical. So sympathetically become less logical, less rational, less in control of your body, and less control of your heart. So pretty much you're going on autopilot, right? For lack of a better word.
Right. And I really like how you shared the sympathetic nervous system and why it's almost called that. It is sympathizing with what we're going through and trying to help us out. Our body and our minds do incredible things for us. During that first stage, we do what's called a primary appraisal, where we look at the event and we decide whether it's stressful, if it's not stressful, if it's irrelevant. And we'll do this every time an event happens in our life. Now, we could have stress that's actually good. That's like you were talking about pressure. Sometimes we need that pressure, that stress. It's motivating.
Pressure makes diamonds, baby.
The second stage is resistance, and this is where your body's preparing to fight the stressor. This is where we do a secondary appraisal, and we try to decide how we're going to manage or respond to that stressful stimuli that we are facing. During the stage, we'll use coping strategies, sometimes successfully, but sometimes not. But that's what generally happens in stage 2. And then stage 3 is an exhaustion phase, and that's where the ability to adapt declines to the point where you have negative symptoms of stress. People in this stage might suffer from physical illness or psychological symptoms. They could face things like the inability to concentrate. Maybe they get snarky or snappy with people. They're a little irritable, or maybe they become disoriented a bit. What happens is we wear out and our physical reserves are depleted. Oftentimes in myself, I notice like throughout the course of a school year, I'm able to keep at a high rate of work. But by the end of the school year, my body physically becomes exhausted, and I end up getting sick. Usually, within 24 hours of hitting final submit on the grades, I notice sometimes I get sick. So,
well, they also talk about so exhaustion. So I'm sure you guys all know the expression, time flies when you're having fun, and kind of time takes forever when it's things that you don't necessarily like. And it's when you're doing things that you don't necessarily like, you're more likely to be in the sympathetic nervous system response. And when that happens, you're more likely to have a lot more nerve messages going up and down, up and down. So it's almost like every single one of your nerves, which is so many, is just holding on to each second just a little bit more. So we never really go through the same amount of seconds. So keep in mind, if you're exhausted, you're like, I have no idea why I'm exhausted. It might not have anything to do with what you've done. It may have everything to do with what you're thinking about from a nervous system standpoint. Boom, and you're healed.
Take a breath, DJ. We're going to talk about different types of stress. So there's acute stress, which is short term, and then there's chronic stress, which is long term. And the interesting thing about the two is that in over 300 studies they've done, short term stress boosts the immune system while chronic stress weakens it. Again, speaking to
pressure makes diamonds.
Speaking to a semester, the short-term stress that I go through keeps me at my top of my game. Things are getting done, conversations are being had, but towards the end of a semester, it becomes more chronic than acute, and then I get that exhaustion phase really starts creeping in.
Boom.
We have a couple of different ways that we cope with stress. Emotion focus, which like it sounds, is when people try to manage their emotions in the face of stress. They try to change the way they feel about it or the way they perceive it. Oftentimes this strategy is used when stress is considered uncontrollable or is high.
This is where I come in. So when it's uncontrollable or high, we talk about different perspectives, which Mom's going to get to, and different thoughts. But another thing is, what are some of the things that we can do from a bodily standpoint to help with that? Okay. And also she's going to get to meditation a little bit later, but from that standpoint, when you can't really control it, oftentimes we talk about all the time, but breathing, especially from your diaphragm, actually does turn on more of your parasympathetic nervous system response, which is where you allow your blood vessels, instead of like this, they come back out. So blood is able to kind of get through the entirety, which is going to give you some of those positive advantages that we talked about. Sometimes it goes away. So breathing could be one thing that you can do. A progressive muscle relaxer, which is flexing, and the focusing on the releasing, which you can kind of look up or go into. But there's a lot of things that we can do from a bodily standpoint that doesn't have to take a whole lot of things. Like, I don't know. But hey, what can we do from here? Boom.
Right. A lot of times too, with emotion focus, we might find ourselves using emotional regulation strategies, which we talked about last week, meditation, prayer, cognitive reappraisal, emotional disclosure. Those kind of things are emotional coping strategies. The other type of coping is problem focused, and this is where we attempt to modify the stressful problem or the source of the stress. And this we tend to use when stress is perceived as controllable and is moderate to low. And some examples of this might be problem solving or time management, right? When you're faced with stress, you want to use some health strategies. You want to take good care of yourself. You want to eat healthy. You want to exercise. You want to get sleep. You want to take breaks.
And you cannot get to other levels of happiness unless you have the basics kind of cleared up. So if you're missing out on one of those things or all those things, you're like, I wonder why I'm unhappy. Also look at some of those factors as well.
Talking to other people is another health strategy. Avoiding drugs and alcohol. Taking a break, and sometimes that's a time break, but sometimes it's a break from the news. Sometimes it's a break from social media. Take physical action. And then prepare for stress before, recognize when you need more help. All right.
Boom.
So some other strategies, downward comparison. And this is where you look towards people who are worse off than you are. You know, you can look in any direction and find people that are having a little harder than you are. And that's what we kind of need to focus on, is to change your perspective. Instead of my life, my problems, my this, my that. Let's take a look at, you know, the bigger picture.
Oh, my commute is 50 minutes long. Well, there's someone's commute that's 51 minutes, 52 minutes, 53 minutes. Some people that don't have a commute. Oh man, I'm not getting as much money as I normally do. Some people aren't making any money. Some people don't even know what it feels like to make a paycheck on their own. So you kind of, you know, let that sink in. And there's always a way, and you could always go to the very, very, you know, kind of the easier ones, like, oh, I have roof over my head. I have this and I have this. But then it goes into, man, like I said, my drive is just a little bit shorter, right? My tasks could be just a little bit more challenging, right? So it depends on who you look at, but ultimately there's always still something that you can do from that standpoint.
Yeah. Giving positive meaning to ordinary events, that is another strategy. Everything that we do has a ripple effect, right? Even the most mundane chores are beneficial in the long run, or we wouldn't be doing them. And so it's really important to look at, even like you said earlier, brushing your teeth, you know, simple things we get to do.
Or another thing, if you want to look at kind of the chain of command for your day, every single morning, I have a little bit of stress, because it's like, man, I can so stay in bed. It's 4:45 in the morning. I can stay in bed, but I know that I will not perform well at my job from 8 to 6 if I don't work out in the morning. So I'm not just looking at it from a workout and getting a six pack and, you know, looking good and all that. I'm actually looking at it from, this is going to help me for a much longer duration of time. Because once again, brushing your teeth will also make me better at my job, right? Taking the showers will make me better at my job, or whatever your purpose is. My purpose is just directly intertwined with what I do. So but just kind of keep that in mind.
Right. Turning the threat into a challenge. So yeah, maybe you have a big test coming up, but don't see that as a negative thing. See it as a challenge.
Opportunity for growth, baby.
Yes.
Bring it on.
Yes.
Bring it on.
Make a threatening situation less threatening. Yeah, just changing your perception a little bit there, maybe breaking it down into smaller pieces, manageable pieces. Changing your goals might be something that you have to do to solve your stressful situation.
Or reminding yourself what your goals are. Kind of like what you said, when you start to get stressed out, like, oh my gosh, I'm getting behind on papers and I gotta be at the top of my game tomorrow, this and this. But hey, are you in line with, you know, some of the things that you took into consideration when you took the job, right? You're still helping people, you're doing this. It's just a part of the ride. You chose this. And so just breathe through it, and hey, guess what? You're on the right track. So that's why it's important to also make sure that if it is something that's stressful in your life, make it so that it's also going to help you with your purpose, with your goals, and with your own fulfillment. Boom.
Take physical action. Do something about it. If you know you have a stressful situation, try to do something about it.
Do it.
Yeah. Prepare for stress before it happens. That's another thing. If you know you have trouble with your car, or if you feel like at work there's going to be some impending layoffs, get your resume ready. There's one thing you can do to prepare for stress before it happens. So there's always things that we can do, especially when we know that there are things that stress us out over and over again.
And oftentimes we know when they're coming. That's even the worst thing, is when you know that they're coming, because they're coming every single day and it's still having the same effect, because it can still be the same external stimuli. You have to change the way that you're looking at it, especially if it's something that you cannot change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Boom.
So the opposite of daily hassles are uplifts. Uplifts are those things, somebody smiling at you, somebody saying good morning, a green light instead of a red light. Those are things that have the reverse effect. You always want to have more uplifts in your life than daily hassles. And I think one of the interesting things about daily hassles versus uplifts is you can ask somebody what their daily hassles are, and they can immediately rattle off 3 or 4 things that irritate them, right? But ask somebody what their uplifts are, and they have to think about it.
Yeah. So kind of going into my profession, yeah, we do a bunch of modules about gratitude, and more specifically the brain negativity bias, and kind of looking in the average thoughts that the people have in the day and the average negative thoughts. You really need to have like 16 or so conscious thoughts in a minute to kind of counteract that brain negativity bias from a mathematical standpoint. So oftentimes I'll ask people, write down as many things as you can within a minute. I won't tell them 16 and I'll say, go. Some people can't do any, some people can do 1, some people can only do 2, some people can get to 16, but more often than not, that is a direct correlation with your happiness and your ability to find that mental resiliency in some of these more stressful situations. If you can't rattle off things that you're grateful for when someone asks you, you're not prepared for life. You're not prepared to go through your life. right? And the easiest thing is always to look around you. It's always easy. I'm very grateful for this microphone. That doesn't work sometimes. So we'll talk about that another time. I'm grateful for this cup that was given to us by a fan. I'm grateful for this that was given to us by a fan. Right? I'm grateful for these pictures behind. I'm grateful for everything around me, and I can pinpoint, and I can make it more so not so stressful anymore.
And if you're focusing on those, you're focusing on the green lights in life and not on the red lights.
Make your own green lights, baby.
Right, right. All right. So this week, we'd like you to focus more on those uplifts in your life. Pay attention to them. Notice them, because they will balance out the daily hassles, which we all have. Change your perspective and use some of the other coping strategies we shared with you today. So until then, let's talk about it Tuesday. Have a great week.
Stress is very important, because if you are great all the time, you never really know how great you are. The only way that you can define true greatness is if you get knocked down and you get up. And even if it's a small thing, get up. It's a big thing, get up, because that's what you're going to have to continuously do, because stress is a part of life, but suffering from it does not have to be. I'm out. Did you see my underwear? Hopefully that got in the video.